So welcome everyone to this online session where we're going to be talking about and getting an update about the hydrogen hubs that are going on right now in the US. As you know, hydrogen hubs are a really excellent tool and strategy to be able to build production and consumption of hydrogen, particularly when we talk about green hydrogen, and is really the key to be able to foster a sustainable industry for the future. As you know, also the DOE had promised to finance up to 7 billion the different hydrogen hubs across the US, and more than 70 hydrogen hubs were put forth for this short list. And very recently, actually, it came across that 7 of those 74 hubs were going to get financing through. And we're here really to catch up and to see what is going on right now, how is it happening, what is happening, what are the next steps, and sort of how is that funding really coming through and helping the industry take the next steps. So the title of this is The Future of Hydrogen Hubs Unlocked, 7 billion in DOE funding unfolded. So with me today, I have 3 top speakers who are going to be giving you sort of the lay of the land on how this is working out. And we're going to begin pretty much immediately. However, before we begin, I'd like to welcome everyone. And I'd like to ask you, please, to introduce yourselves so that we can get to know you a little bit. Just use the chat on your right-hand side and say your name, your company, and where you're joining from. I am quite sure that there is going to be a lot of people from the US, but also from international markets interested to see the development of the US hydrogen market, because it's really setting the scene and the regulatory background for many other countries. So please introduce yourselves. And Gallego, it's a little bit tricky to pronounce. And I'm based in Madrid. I'm connecting from Madrid in Spain today. And I work for ATA Insights. And in ATA, we're organizing events in hydrogen across the world. And we will have one coming up later this year. And we had one last year, which is why we're following this market quite closely. And we'd like to come to you when there is important developments so that there is information running along and we all can be in the know, which hopefully means that the sector actually goes faster and moves faster. So thank you very much, everyone, for introducing yourselves. Please keep going. And in the meanwhile, we're going to get to know a little bit the experts of today. You will definitely recognize the companies and institutions and hubs, and you most probably will also recognize some, if not all, of the faces, because they're pretty well-known experts in the industry. However, I'd like for you to hear from them. So in the first place, please, I'd like to ask TJ from RMI to please introduce yourself so that people can get to know you.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm TJ Kirk. I'm manager of Climate Industries at RMI, formerly known as Rocky Mountain Institute. And I'll be talking today about an overview of the hydrogen hubs, giving a sense of where some of the funding is going, some of the amounts here, some of the end uses, and trying to get at some angles that I don't think are being talked about enough in the hub overview at the moment. And I'm calling in here from Boulder, Colorado. Back to you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, TJ. I'm really looking forward to hearing, where all of the sort of like details, because also RMI has been involved in many of those hubs proposals. So you're definitely someone in the know. Next, I'd like you to get to know Tyson from Arches, which is one of the very well-known hydrogen hubs. So Tyson, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Tyson Eckerle with Arches and also with the California Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. And Arches, I'll talk a little bit more about it, but it's a partnership, public-private, across the multiple stakeholders with the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development leading on the state side. And so been integral in the Arches system, and thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, Tyson. And I'd like to also to ask John from Obsidian to please introduce yourself.
Hi, John Cable. I'm a partner with Obsidian Renewables. We're an independent developer of hydrogen projects based in the Pacific Northwest. We sponsored a hydrogen hub application for the region, one of 2 out of the state of Washington and Oregon. We're ultimately encouraged to advance, so we're one of the 28, I think, encouraged hydrogen hub proposals. Ultimately, the Pacific Northwest Hydrogen Hub allocation was given to the Department of Commerce, state of Washington. But we're very focused on many of the projects that grew out of our hydrogen hub and the research and development that went into that.
So thank you very much. So as you can see, we have RMI, who's been involved in many of these processes, and we have Arches, is one of the hubs that has gotten some of the finance from the DOE, and then we have also a different hub that is actually not gotten this finance, but is working through different pathways to try to get to develop further. So I think we all agree in here. If you're here, you probably agree that hydrogen hubs are the key. You know that certainly just having a price for hydrogen is not enough. We need to be able, to have sort of consumption and production in the same place. So let's take it from there. So how it's going to work today is going to be really simple. It's going to be an hour or so, and it's all going to be recorded. You're going to have access to the materials that you see on screen. So you'll get an email in a couple of days with the recordings and the access to the materials. So don't worry about that. And we're going to have two presentations, actually two PowerPoints on screen. First one from RMI, the second one from Arches. And then we're going to have also a presentation, but without a PowerPoint, from Obsidian. And afterwards, we're happy to take your questions. I am going to have some questions of my own, I think, because there is a lot, to be discussed in here. And I'm sure some of it will come up also in the conversation with you guys. But if you have any questions, please don't send them via the chat. They get a little entangled in the rest of the conversation. So I would appreciate if you send them via the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen so we can properly manage those questions, and our speakers also can answer them if there's a lot of them by text and so on and so forth. So without further ado, I'd like to ask the first of the speakers today. TJ, please, if you could share your screen, take your mute off and go for it. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Really excited to see how many folks here are international as well as domestics. I think we'll have a really robust conversation. For my presentation, again, I want to give a quick overview of the hubs themselves, what it means for the capital unlock. We are going to have to talk about 45V, a tax incentive in the US that's having a huge impact on hydrogen that I think most people have at least heard of at this point, and some of the recent ruling that came out for that, and then what a realistic timeline for the hubs looks like. So first on RMI itself, for folks who haven't heard of us, we're a climate-focused nonprofit looking to accelerate the clean energy transition. We work across a lot of key sectors, particularly I work in heavy industries, and we try to use whatever tools are available to us, whether that's policy, technology, finance, or anything else, to try to make a difference in those markets. But what we're really here to talk about today are these clean hydrogen hubs. So here are the 7 winners of, the 7 selected hubs of the process from DOE. We'll talk about later that there is still an ongoing process for that funding. None of these hubs have actually received a single dollar yet, and they are still at the minimum months away from receiving any of that funding. So out of these 7 hubs, RMI was involved in 3 of these applications, and we supported a 4th one, WISH, which would have been in the center of the country that did not be selected for negotiation. So a little bit of an eye exam here for just an overview of what each of these different hubs is proposing to do. The interesting thing here is to look at the requested award amount. The hub amounts range from about 750 million up to 1.2 billion. So they're all fairly similar around that $1 billion mark. And then the private investment has not been disclosed for all of the hubs, but the White House in aggregate says that $40 billion has been promised in terms of private investment. So we're looking at around a $50 billion capital unlock with an expected output of 3 million tons per year of hydrogen production by 2030. And all of this is meant to be quote unquote clean hydrogen, so underneath a certain set limit of carbon intensity, but does include a lot of both blue and green. And again, for some hubs, that proportion of blue versus green has not been disclosed yet and is still being negotiated. I do want to touch a little bit here on the end uses by hub, since I think this really gets a lot more interesting, not just on the production side, but how we're going to use the hydrogen that we make. If you look across the different hubs, you can kind of see some clear favorites here. That power generation is a very easy, applicable end use for hydrogen. And almost every hub, lists that as one of the things they want to use hydrogen for. But the other kind of surprising one in my mind was road transport, that a lot of hubs are seeing a future for heavy duty transport for long haul trucking as a use for hydrogen. You can also see kind of, the classic use cases of traditional gray hydrogen at the moment, refining chemicals and fertilizers showing up here, but not as strongly as I would have suspected originally. And I also want to give a shout out to steel and glass, that from a climate perspective, steel is one of the best uses for hydrogen from an emissions perspective. So again, I was a little bit disappointed that only one of the winning hubs actually listed that as an intended use case, but something I expect to see ramp up more in the future. I also want to talk more about that capital unlock piece we mentioned earlier and kind of put this all in perspective and also kind of tee up why we need to talk about 45V. So we have $7 billion being kicked in from the government, 40 billion being kicked in from private investment. But out of that 3 million tons per year, if 2/3 of that is produced by truly green hydrogen that meets all of the standards for 45V, and then is produced over the 10 years that the IRA 45V funding is available, that would be worth $60 billion. So more than the entire combined, public and private investment into the hubs itself. And that also 45V funding is available to everyone. It is not, an award or grant that has to be fought for. So I think there's a huge, potential impact here from 45V, both to projects outside of the hubs that weren't selected and potentially could use this to continue going forward, but also to projects within the hub. They're going to be relying on this funding to make those project economics work. And it's one of the reasons why the timeline and announcements are a little bit slow at the moment that we'll get to. So I'm going to assume that most people have heard of 45V, have some understanding of it. It is a very wonky political, set of rules. Essentially, if companies and projects meet the standard for both the carbon intensity of a project of being below 0.45 kilograms of carbon dioxide per kilogram of hydrogen, as well as meeting prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements, they can receive $3 per kilogram of hydrogen produced, which is pretty significant. Treasury has been in charge of trying to implement this rule and put out guidelines for how companies can prove that they are below that carbon intensity standard. And they have a line of what is called the 3 pillars around incrementality or additionality, deliverability, and temporal matching. So to put this in really simple layman's terms, additionality means that the renewable assets have to be new renewable assets. Deliverability means that the power produced has to be within the same region where it's being used, and temporal matching means it has to be produced at the same time that it's then being used by hydrogen. And for all of these, there's been considerable argument and discussion around, like, for temporal matching, is an annual true-up good enough, or does it have to be at the same hour that this is being produced? And it has caused a lot of consternation for the industry as folks try to wrestle with what does this then imply for the potential cost of these systems. So on December 22nd, right before the winter holidays, Treasury released their draft guidance around this, largely following the European standards, providing a little bit of a grandfather clause, but being pretty strict on the 3 pillars being required by 2028. However, we are still in the comment period for 90 days, and there are still, kind of a couple, additional pathways that companies can explore, both as further comments are being requested on gas pathways, and projects can propose new hydrogen production pathways themselves. So 45V is still a little bit in play, but it's starting to get settled. One point I want to bring up, this is some analysis that RMI is working on and we'll actually be talking about later in a webinar, I believe in an hour and a half from now. And essentially, we do have a perspective that every hub will have enough qualifying clean power on an hourly basis by 2030 to meet this standard. This does not say anything about the economics of those projects, but that would imply for how much you'd have to pay for that power. And in sub-hubs, particularly on the East Coast, looking at Appalachia and Mid-Atlantic, it is pretty close in terms of how much, clean hourly matched power would be available. But we believe for the other hubs, there is, significant power available, though, again, this is total amount of potential power under an NREL scenario, and doesn't also cover the other potential uses for that clean power. So if another hydrogen project outside of the hub wants to use clean hourly matched power, that would cut into these allocations. So lots of caveats there, but we do believe there's going to be a strong emerging market around clean power that can improve that hourly certificate. Then getting into the timeline itself, DOE releases very helpful, really busy graphics showing kind of the timeline of how these hubs move forward. So to make it a little bit simpler, we are here in the negotiation phase. At this moment, we have 7 hubs that have been selected for negotiations. Not a single one has technically been awarded yet. So no dollars have been released, no money is going out the door. They still have to argue with DOE about it. And the problem for all of the projects and hubs is they don't have firm guidance on those 45V rules, that, as we saw earlier, is going to have a huge impact on the project economics. So as a developer, I wouldn't want to commit to a project unless I was certain I was going to receive an incentive that I'm counting on for this. And so I think both sides are kind of, playing a little bit close to the chest at the moment. As far as when this money will then actually be released, once the project is officially awarded in phase one, they can spend up to $20 million of funding over that first about year and a half. And then it's not until phase two that they really get to start seriously deploying that $7 billion. So if you look at an implementation timeline, we're really looking at about a decade for the hub projects, which also matches well with the 45V guidance, both being released, and then 45V itself lasts for 10 years once you start to claim it for a given project. Wow. We went through a lot of information there very quickly, so I'm sure there'll be some questions I can get to in the chat later on here in a moment. But as far as key takeaways of what you should, think about from this, the three things I don't see being talked about enough are, number one, the impact of 45V on projects advancing, both in terms of how well it influences the economics and the fact that the guidance isn't finalized yet. The second thing is there's a strong need for infrastructure, both within the hubs and between hubs, that a lot of these projects are really focused on production and some end uses, but may not have accounted for how are you actually going to move that hydrogen? Do you need to put it into a different molecule like methane or ammonia? And if you're trying to do projects between hubs, like for example that long haul road trucking, where is the refueling station infrastructure going to come from? How is that process really going to work? Especially since WISH did not receive funding and also had long haul trucking as one of its proposed end uses. And finally, I think the project timeline is going to be a little bit longer than we might hope right now. Hydrogen has a nasty habit of going in hype cycles. And, I think with all the announcements of funding, we've been at a lot of hype in the moment. But now as projects start to get implemented and move towards that final investment decision, we are seeing those timelines go a little bit longer as the costs are going a little bit higher than we originally anticipated. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the next presenter and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, TJ. We in Europe have been talking about these three incrementality. We call it geographical correlation, but essentially it's the same as deliverability, temporal matching for a while. So there'll be questions, I think, about that. But I just wanted to ask for a clarification from the three of you. Is this 100% how it's going to proceed? Because my understanding is this is yet in draft. Hence, there is negotiations going without the knowledge of how it's going to shape up. Okay, so that's happening right now. Okay, we've gone through that too. It feels like you guys are like maybe a few months behind, but not very much behind with these items, and they're definitely tricky to work with, especially because the price of the generation of hydrogen is so much higher right away just with these three items. So that makes it a little bit trickier. Okay, let's go to the next presentation. And there is a few questions if you want to take a look and maybe see if there is any that you can answer for now, but otherwise we'll take them at the end. Tyson, you're next. So if you want to put your presentation up and make sure you take your mute when you're done. And this is really exciting, however, because I tell you, a few comments that I'll give you later is that in Europe, at least, we're not given that much time for anything to develop, and there is not that much money. So there's a lot going for the US right now. Go on, Tyson.
Yeah, great. Well, great. Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks, TJ. It's a great overview. So yeah, I'm with ARCHES, as I talked about, so the Alliance for Renewable Clean Hydrogen Energy Systems. We're focused in on renewable clean hydrogen or green hydrogen. And I'll talk a little bit about, from electrolytic and also from biogenic pathways. But just a little bit, I won't read all these words, but just kind of about ARCHES. And so there's, really the 6 pillars or five pillars, I guess. There's a lot of pillars in the hydrogen world, but that, what ARCHES does, we have state, we have organized labor, communities, we have higher education and the national labs and industry kind of all coming together to build out this ecosystem approach to bring together. And so what we've learned, through time, and I think we've all known this, and the importance of the hubs is the ability to bring together supply and demand and help drive down costs for everyone. And I think that's why you're hearing a lot of attention also on the 45V, because it has a direct impact on the actual end use costs. And in California, we have a advantage of a really robust regulatory environment, especially in the zero emission vehicle space. And if you look at just using transit as an example, there's a tremendous amount of excitement about hydrogen fuel cell buses. But the number one thing that the operators worry about is the cost of hydrogen. So we have to get the cost of renewable hydrogen down. And that's what this opportunity is. And so Arches is really focused on driving down the cost of renewable hydrogen and being able to connect that to the end user so that we can drive the market to scale. And so this is a bit of an overview of kind of what the system is. So we pulled together a pretty robust ecosystem of projects. We've put it into kind of tier 1 and 2 as far as, so tier 1 was what we put forward to be funded by the Department of Energy. So we had 39 projects kind of balanced across these sectors. And then tier 2 is the projects that are on the bench that still have very viable, just there's only so much funding to go around. And so the graphic here on the right is kind of our feedstock. So we have a lot of renewable electricity in California. We're building it. We have full commitment to getting to carbon neutrality by 2045, and hydrogen has a huge role to play in that. So both pulling from the renewable electricity sector, but also from biogenic sources like municipal waste and woody biomass. There's some ancillary benefits from that for cleaning up forest biomass as well. Then with the production, we have the electrolysis and then biohydrogen production, and then into the distribution network. And so as part of this, we're building out pipelines, the sort of pipeline network, and we'll be relying pretty heavily on, hydrogen fuel cell, liquid hydrogen tanker trucks with a minimal amount of storage. We're really focused on balancing supply and demand. And then those feed into our primary offtake things is, hydrogen for power generation. So these are 2030 numbers, 200 metric tons per day. Transportation being a big one. That's where a lot of the benefits are driven because of all the emissions benefits, especially from an air quality perspective, but certainly from a climate change perspective. And then ports. And we have, 40% of the goods coming into the U.S. come through our port systems here. So we have a huge impact. And the community, especially in the Los Angeles and Long Beach region, bear a lot of the burden there. So that's kind of an overview of our system. And then if you look, here's more of a geographic picture of what this is. So we have, on the left here, our production sites are in teal, and then consumption sites are in orange. This is that full build out in 2030. And you're looking from today, we're going from almost all of our clean hydrogen is going to transportation. This is an opportunity to, between now and then to scale to, the power sector and ports. But then that really opens the door to a big step change in terms of scale up by 2045 to get to carbon neutrality. And that's when you start bringing in industry. So TJ, I know that you talked about all the different things. So that's, we see this as a phasing in. Like there's a lot of interest in ammonia, for example, and fertilizer. We have some cement manufacturing, but, we had to pick markets to kick this off. A huge, DOE has a huge focus, and we do too on, communities, making sure that this works for the community. So we have, we released our community benefits plan that we submitted to DOE. It's on the Arches website if anybody's interested, but there's a lot of work and outreach ongoing, in the years leading up to the application and going forward now, working with communities to make sure that their voices are heard in the process and that the projects that go in are stuff that benefit them. We have a really strong partnership with labor, and so all of our agreements will have project labor, or all of our projects will have project labor agreements with local hire provisions to make sure that we're reaching into the communities that need the jobs the most. So we're very excited about that. And then 1% of every project budget will be invested directly into the communities. We have a bunch of money going into workforce development. We're going to be, working with the communities to develop scorecards and be able to track and monitor and make sure that these projects are something that people are excited about and deliver direct community benefits, whether it's parks, jobs, certainly air quality benefits. And then this kind of gives an overview of our thing. And so this on the left-hand side, we call it our Andy Warhol graphic, so to speak. So it's essentially on the top left, you have all the Arches hub sites, and then we've overlaid, this is real data with disadvantaged communities, low-income communities, and air pollution. There's a really strong correlation there. And what that does is drives a lot of benefits towards the communities we're trying to reach the most. And so the top number is probably the eye-popping one. We estimate $2.95 billion of economic value from avoided health costs associated with this. So essentially the hub pays for itself in terms of health benefits, and a lot of that is from the reduction of diesel pollution. So we are targeting 5,500 trucks and 1,000 buses, which is a lot, but it's kind of just shows how much of an impact diesel pollution has on community health, especially in the corridors where our goods movement goes. There are people who live in Long Beach and Los Angeles right on that corridor who it's beautiful weather, but they cannot have their windows open and they have air filters going. And so we're very excited to electrify those, like the Interstate 710. That includes battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell electric, but getting diesel off the road. The other big number is the 222,000 jobs we estimate will be created from this. And then, going down the list, there's a ton of other stuff, like the reduced hospital visits, reduced emissions from NOx, all that type of stuff. And so we also have a strong engagement and strong partnership with our tribal partners throughout the state. And so there's big opportunities there. And then the last thing I wanted to do is, and TJ already covered a lot of this. And so this negotiation map, we're in this area. This is another DOE graphic, which is really helpful. So we are in the area where there's an orange band. Hopefully very shortly, we'll be finishing up what the selectee, so what ARCH's responsibilities are with DOE in the next month or two, and then they will go back and do their part. So as TJ said, it's probably months away until there's actual money flowing to the hubs. And then you saw this one, so it's kind of the same thing. TJ's already covered it. The last thing I want to say is that in California, we're a big state, 5th largest economy in the world. There are a lot of agencies, a lot of players in the market, and what Governor Newsom tasked us at GoBiz to do is to work, closely through ARCH's and with ARCH's to develop a hydrogen market development strategy to get everybody pulling in the same direction. And so this is complementary to ARCH's, making sure that all of our policies are aligning and our implementation is aligning to help enable this market as quickly as possible. And then I think I'll stop there and hand it back to you.
Thank you very much, Tyson. And I think this presentation, I think it exemplified very well what a valley is supposed to do, which is not only put the producers and the consumers together, which is something I hinted at before, but also to create a whole value chain across the entire society for things to go forward for everyone. I think it's excellent, and is what sells these projects well at the policy level. However, they're so difficult to implement because they're so complicated in terms of everything they affect. They're very transversal, aren't they? And this is where it gets complicated. And I can see now, I have a lot of questions about Tyson. I wanted to ask you, when we're saying we're in negotiation, and also TJ said this, how long does it take until we get to the end of that and sort of the money is released? Is this a matter of months, years? Do we know? We may not know.
It's all a little bit of a guess right now. I would say it's months, definitely not years. Definitely not years. So I think this year we will finish the negotiation. I would say the first half of this year, but we're I'm optimistic. It also depends on how quickly like the NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act type of stuff happens on the DOE side, and we're working through how to break that out, because if you look at our hub, it's pretty complex, and if we did one blanket environmental assessment, environmental impact,
it's impossible.
Very difficult to do. So it's like, how do you chunk that out in a way that is true to the law? It's questions like that can drive timeline, but that also a lot of those questions can be answered in phase 1 as well. So we're optimistic. I would say months, and a handful of months.
And in these months, you from the amount that you've been given, in the case of ARCH's, I think is 1.2 billion. You will will decide how that money will be given out and what will be done with it, rather than whether that money goes to you, right? It's more about how it's used. Okay, so there is no chance that one of the hubs will sort of come out of that race. They'll be certainly, it's just getting to that end. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tyson. There'll be a lot of more questions, and there's a few for you already in the Q&A box, but we'll continue thereafter after John's presentation. So, John, it's your turn, and we know that you don't have a presentation per se, but there are some really interesting questions for you, because you were not only in the first 70 plus original hubs, but also in the peak of the ones that were asked and invited to move forward. But then ultimately you did not get in that. However, I remember from speaking to you guys before that the hub was also equally, complex and well thought out. So what are the next steps? Because ultimately, I think you guys probably need this as much as, any of the hubs that actually got the money. So how are you going to go ahead with the plans, or to what extent, or with what funding?
I
Go
appreciate
ahead.
that. In a sense, our plans have changed a lot. In a sense that they've changed very little. So our original hub proposal involved a fairly extensive network of pipeline and storage infrastructure that was spread across Eastern Oregon and Eastern Washington. And that infrastructure was really intended to serve several hydrogen market segments that we see developing at various rates in our states. So the end markets haven't changed, but our approach to serving those customers has changed to an extent. I think the biggest change is that we're designing and developing sites to serve clusters of customers. I wouldn't refer to them so much as a hub, but a cluster. So when I think about our business right now, our pipeline can be segmented into nine active projects under development, intended to have infrastructure on 4 to 5 sites, but serve multiple customers at each of those sites. So I think about projects in terms of customers. We're very commercially driven, and the design and development activity that we're pursuing is in response to a direct bilateral negotiation with a customer, a demonstrated desire for offtake, specific conversations around pricing, which of course is highly dependent on the 45V tax credit, which I think is something we're going to talk about more later. But ultimately, we're trying to achieve the same mission, which is to bring low carbon fuels to customers that need it to decarbonize their processes, and in our states to meet regulatory requirements. So in the state of Washington, the state of Oregon, there are fairly aggressive mandates to decarbonize the grid. So those mandates align well with federal incentives. And it's encouraging a lot of hydrogen development activity, specifically in the power generation sector. So a big part of our business plan is to serve utilities and independent power producers with low carbon fuel to blend into their combustion turbines, replacing natural gas in the process. We're also focused on providing low carbon fuels to the transportation sector, beginning with ocean going freight, but also positioned to serve the highway trucking sector as stations develop. And lastly, we're developing hydrogen as part of a 24/7 solution for data centers. So the large data center operators and major tech companies, including Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, Facebook, all have significant data center presence in the Pacific Northwest, which we are developing infrastructure to serve. I thought TJ did a really nice job of setting up the importance of 45V. He talked about $7 billion being attached to these hubs in the form of direct funding, and $40 billion of private investment, matching funds attached to that. And then I think his estimate was $60 billion in funding attached to 45V credits. And in a sense, I think of the $40 billion in private investment that you referred to and the $60 billion in 45V tax credits as linked. I mean, I think that capital is tied in the capital stack in many regards. So while the $7 billion funding to hubs is very important. The incentives to encourage that $100 billion of private capital into these projects, whether it's connected to a hub or whether it's connected to an independent development like the ones we're focused on, it's critical that the 45V regulations be set in a way that fosters project financing and project bankability. Just one point of correction. I think, TJ, you said that there were 90 days to comment, and I had 60 days in my mind, and I'm not sure who's right, but in any case, it's a short period to comment, and folks should be focused on it and weighing in when, as much as they can.
Thank you very much. I suppose we can start with 45B, which is a very easy way to say all this, trifecta, I suppose. The additionality, incrementality actually is a better word, I think, for this. The deliverability, I love that word also, which we used to. Can I start with you, John? I mean, what is your opinion on these things? One, I would like to ask your opinion in terms of how they work and whether they're a hinder or like a help at this point. And second, whether you think they'll stay or they'll be changed somehow in those 60 days or 90 days, whatever it is.
So the 45V regulations, and specifically the mechanism for determining well-to-gate greenhouse gas emissions in connection with projects is it's really critical to being able to forecast the production tax and credit income to a project and forecast the cash flow of the project. To put that in perspective, many of the projects that we're developing and other independent developers are developing rely on the production tax credit for as much as 50% or more of the revenue to the project. So the returns on investment are really highly sensitive to how this production tax credit is going to be earned and paid. As developers focused on hydrogen and working towards decarbonization in every way that we can, we obviously agree with general principles of additionality and deliverability and temporal matching. I think the intent there is good, but the devil is in the details, and getting too strict on some of these pillars may be detrimental to the bankability of projects, which will really hinder progress in rolling out this infrastructure and achieving the goals that the IRA seeks to achieve, both from a climate perspective and from a economic employment, workforce development perspective, and frankly, from a manufacturing perspective and developing a healthy onshore industry in supporting these renewable energy projects. So the pillar and the framework that we're most concerned with is the temporal matching, and specifically the GREET model, which has been proposed as the mechanism to measure energy attribute certificates, or EACs, which are what will be used to verify the carbon emissions of the project and collect the production tax credit income. It's complex and it's subject to change. And those things are difficult to overcome when you're trying to finance a large scale infrastructure project. So we have some alternative approaches that we're going to suggest, and we're going to make an effort to underscore that temporal matching is neither necessary nor really a sufficient condition for optimizing emissions from these projects. There are several instances where hourly matching can actually result in a suboptimal outcome from a system-wide grid perspective. So I think I'll pause there and let some of the other, let Tyson and TJ comment.
I let you guys go ahead. Just bear in mind, some of the questions here hint at the fact that people didn't quite understand exactly how the temperate match works. So maybe going a little more detail or giving a couple of examples would help. Not for everybody's, some people will probably understand it because it's quite tricky to get your head around. Tyson, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think, well, maybe just on the temporal matching, the idea is you create these hourly certificates that would be tracked, verified, and stuff. And so part of the concern there for us is that adds a considerable amount of expense to the thing. And I think if we're going to do hourly matching, we should do it for all technologies and set up the system to do it that way. The way it works in California now under the renewable portfolio standard is we do hourly matching, but on an annualized basis. So it's a little bit more simple. There's not, we still get tremendous emissions benefits from it. And so I think on the 45V, some of the big things, there's a lot of caution to throw out there in terms of unintended consequences. And I think what we're seeing is some of the difficulty of applying a nationwide standard within the context of various states. And so states with an aggressive renewable portfolio standard like California, we have 100% RPS target. It has to be 100% clean energy from, by 2045. And additionality on top of that doesn't work in California. So that's a big challenge. And our queue for interconnection currently stands at 500,000 megawatts of clean energy waiting to be connected to the grid. Now, of course, not all of that will do. We can, in a very good year, we connect 6,000 to 8,000 megawatts of power. And so the additionality, the devil's in the details on how it is interpreted. Is it above that RPS? Because if it's above the RPS, it won't ever get built for hydrogen, right? And so that's our big worry. Now it's different in other states. So if you're going to develop in a state that doesn't have RPS, it's a little bit easier to show that additionality piece. And so we're looking for nuance to figure out, how to, because at the end of the day, we need to implement it. We want to implement this in California. We want to build these projects in California. And then within the context of deliverability, that, it seems to be like the proposal has some pretty regional type of things. So the map that's drawn is mostly focused. It's like California wide, which I think is probably workable, but even better would be to integrate across the WEC, like the Western region. So you can start to integrate renewables there. And so what we think we can do if we do this right is we can really drive renewable penetration broadly across the region. So it's just the main thing to make sure is being aware of unintended consequences with the tax credit, and the more certainty and less complication we can put into the system, the better off we're going to be in terms of launching the market. And maybe just one other thing, that I think gets lost a lot of times, is we focus an awful lot on the production of hydrogen and the emissions associated with the production, which is very important, but we also need to really focus in on the end use sectors as well. So if you look at the whole system, even like in our system, for example, even if you used all natural gas to make hydrogen, and this is not what Arches is proposing, all natural gas and no carbon capture, and then you put it into the power, transportation, and ports, you would still be net positive on climate. So we just have to be careful and mindful of kind of what we're solving for. And those vectors, hydrogen is such an important vector to get to those hard to decarbonize areas. So that's a lot of where the worry comes from on the 45V, just making sure that we get it right so that you can implement it in all the states in a way that's equitable and doesn't disadvantage the front runners.
TJ, go ahead.
Yeah, chime on a couple of things here. To Tyson's point about the end use matters, I've seen proposals to take natural gas, turn it into hydrogen, and then burn that hydrogen in a retrofitted natural gas plant. From a climate perspective, that's not a victory as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, end use matters a lot. On the hourly piece, the big challenge, as others have said, is that at the moment there just isn't a lot of these renewable energy certificates or environmental attributes, that contain that hourly piece that we need. And as one of the questions really astutely put, it's not just the hubs competing for these. Companies like Google and Microsoft and others are eventually going to want to, have the claim that they are decarbonizing, temporally as well, that they're being able to match this. So there will be, additional competition for those credits when they are available. So in that analysis I shared earlier, that was just a technical look at how much is total available, did not take into account economics or competitive uses for them. So let me be really clear on that point. And then the final point I want to make out is that this only matters for systems that are connected to the grid. You can do an entirely off-grid hydrogen system, build your own renewable assets, power it to an electrolyzer, and Treasury says you're good to go, that that is a renewable green hydrogen system. The challenge, of course, is that the utilization rate is really difficult to bring up to an economic point. And so a lot of folks would love to be able to connect to the grid and have a much higher utilization of their electrolyzers. But there are folks trying to advance projects entirely behind the grid. High Store is one of them in Mississippi, for example. So that, those projects do exist, but if you're trying to really scale this, that grid connection is sort of that key to get to a lot of scale.
So thank you very much all for your opinions. I'm really looking forward to following this topic. I think we should do a webinar sooner rather than later about 45V to understand it really well, because everything is just so complex with these things. I was, when I read that this was the system in the US, I was like, because it took me so long to understand in Europe in the first place, and it's very similar. However, the one thing we do have in Europe that I was asking whether you have here, because here we have a similar challenge. It's not the same Norway than Spain, than Poland, So we have very, very similar challenges. And the way they've done it is they have this sort of exception called like a decarbonized grid, where if you get to a certain decarbonization, then you don't have to worry about any hourly matching. Like essentially that's done for you. And actually, when you calculate, when you get to those points, according to the national plans for decarbonization, for example, in the case of Spain, it would be like certainly by 2028, 2029. So actually, we might be able, I don't know exactly what this means, because I am sure that something that sounds simple, but then when you look, it's actually not that complicated, but that would be also a way to get over this matter. Is this something that is considered in 45V? Because it sounds like a very easy and reasonable addition, to add depending on the portfolio standard in each of the states, and has the precedent already in Europe. In fact, Norway is one of the countries that can right away, doesn't need to worry about any hourly match whatsoever. So as an example. So sorry that I'm talking so much about Europe. I know this is about the US, but I think it's interesting that we're having, this going also on the two sides, because I expected, honestly, much looser expectations in terms of carbon density in the US. Quite honestly, originally, I thought that would make a little bit of a slight, international competition, and that might work well for the hydrogen industry as a whole. And it's kind of resulted slightly different. So if you don't mind, should we go for some of the questions we have there? Some of them I've marked, some of them I haven't. Maybe we can go through them and see. So we have 10 right now. So Michael asks, will the Treasury draft tax lines implemented this, if they're implemented as currently worded, mean that nuclear power plants won't qualify as green hydrogen? Oh, Michael, we had this conversation long and hard in Europe as well. So but I leave the experts for this. So TJ, Tyson, John, is nuclear okay for 45V?
I would say it's unclear at the moment. It would depend who you ask and whether or not they, have a vested interest in nuclear. That the way IRA is written, some of the tax pieces do include, nuclear power. Some of the hubs have been included that have existing nuclear plants. So at the moment, I think this comment period is really crucial for that, and why, folks are unwilling to make big pronouncements about it. I don't know, Tyson, John, if you have a different view.
I would agree. I think that's a fair characterization.
So, as you know, this is something in Europe, we went back and forth, and in the end, they also gave them a temporal up until 2028, providing you still have the green certificates for new, you can use nuclear power. So we've already gone through this in here. So again, I was expecting a lot looser, this, and it may resolve that way. You guys are still like in the draft, so this may change a little well. But we had the issue with France as well, and in the end it is allowed, but only for like a few years essentially. Okay, so Rodri asks, and I haven't read this before, so let's read it now together. I'm a process engineer at Green Cut. I consider a strict 45V to be the best outcome environmentally and hopefully lead to correct market-based incentives. My main concern is around the lack of information on IRA credit emission rules for blue hydrogen, especially for fugitive emissions. Actually, I haven't seen anything about fugitive emissions anywhere. We need a lot more research on this. I'm concerned that if they're not fully accounted for, you will see serious market distortion in favor of centralized and pre-existing infrastructure. A penny for your thoughts. So who raises to the challenge, Rodri's challenge?
I can jump in first. I think I see my name at the very top of it.
Yes,
I would say that my understanding is that GREET does include from well upwards. So fugitive emissions should be included in the GREET modeling. And any accurate accounting of emissions from methane, especially if it's using the 20-year global warming potential, is going to disqualify blue hydrogen from the highest levels of 45V. And 45V drops off from 100% down to 33% if you miss that first highest tier. So I think most blue hydrogen is just going to target 45Q. It's much more straightforward. There is no carbon intensity requirement for 45Q. It's simply around how much carbon are they putting back underneath the ground or just capturing. So yeah, if I was a blue hydrogen producer, I wouldn't bother with 45V personally.
Any additions, any of you?
Different arches, for example.
I would just add, I haven't studied the GREET model as closely as some of my colleagues, but as I understand it, the upstream emissions are assigned or specific to region, if not even pipeline. So I think that there are some embedded assumptions in the background of the GREET model that do factor in, that do address some of the concerns that are being raised in this question.
Actually, all of the questions that we have about 45B, so clearly there's still a few things here that, someone here says, like, can the speakers provide their assessment on whether the current draft of 45V will actually lead to the development of a sustainable hydrogen market, or alternatively, lead only to a few large green projects due to how complex they are, and this fail to see the hydrogen industry sort of lift off and able to get us off fossil fuels. And I think you already, Tyson, you hinted at this, but maybe you're going to, is this the solution we need?
So, yeah, I don't know. It's hard to tell what'll happen. I think the main thing we need is certainty, and so if each of these avenues of the 45V tax credit introduce some complexity and uncertainty into the equation that have to be addressed. And so, ultimately, if the credit's rich enough and, industry will figure it out. What we're worried about, as you see these things kind of breaking down, from a systems perspective, I think it's a suboptimal approach if you're trying to launch the market. But so we'll see. It remains to be seen how this all plays out. But I think it's the uncertainty around what the standards are and what the implementation looks like, and even the hourly matching. Like, a system does not exist for hourly matching yet. And of course, we can figure it out as a society, as a group. But how much is that going to cost? And what is the grandfather, what does the 3-year look back look like? And is the tax credit going to change throughout the life of the project? It's all those types of uncertainties that kind of eat away at getting to a final investment decision to go forward. And so that's, I think, part of the big worry, and just of the ability to implement.
Okay, so we have only a few minutes. So there's a few questions left, but they're all kind of around the same topic. So I don't know if I'm missing something out here. Perhaps I haven't understood them properly. Would you mind taking a look and letting me know whether any specifically we haven't answered clearly before, or we need to answer? Because I think most of them really have been answered. And it's all about, again, like 45V, is really, really hard for us really to make, I suppose, an investment decisions. I think everything is on hold at the moment until that is clarified. If it's only 60 days, it'll be easier. But do you expect this to be resolved within 60 days, 90 days, whichever it is? Because it seems like a very short time for me. And another question, is blue hydrogen completely out of the,
So,
yeah.
well, and forgive me if this is a shameless thing to do here, but RMI is hosting a webinar an hour from now with our policy experts all about 45V. So
Everyone
if
invited.
folks are free, then yeah, I put a link in the chat. But yeah, I think that'll be a good chance if folks really want to dive into 45V just itself. But sorry, I don't mean to distract from this.
Okay, no, that's fine. I mean, here, this is a fair question, actually. Could any of the hubs actually be killed with the strict 45V guidance? Luke asks, this is a very good question.
No, it won't kill. Well, I don't know if it'll kill hubs. It might kill some it'll certainly kill some projects.
Projects within hubs, yes, absolutely.
Okay, fair enough. But I mean, the hubs have all been included in this thing. Okay, so I think for today,
just to put a finer
go on, John.
Point on that, I mean, how the 45V regs get set is really going to govern the flow of private capital and support of these projects. So to the extent that they're strict, uncertain, introduce complexity, as a general proposition, those elements work against deploying capital and building out the infrastructure that I think we're all oriented toward building. So, if there's a final thought here, it's that I think there's an opportunity to put some more flexibility into the regulations and allow hydrogen plant operators who are in the field, who are operating within regionally specific resource conditions and grid conditions to respond and dial up or dial down their hydrogen production at optimal points, both for electrolyzer yield, but also for grid emissions. So there's really an opportunity to optimize this if we allow for some regional specificity and some flexibility on the part of plant operators in the field to to realize the advantages of this technology that we're trying to roll out. So,
last words, Tyson.
Well, I think that's right, and it's just to put a fine point to using an example of what the tax credit guidance can do. So, as I read it, I think that it's uncertain whether or not you can use curtailed power going forward for 10 years to do this. And so in California, we have, I think 48,000 megawatts. I can't remember the numbers now. It's equivalent of 131 tons of hydrogen per day of curtailed power in 2022 alone. And that number is going up. And so that's exactly the electricity we want to be using to put into batteries to create hydrogen and all that type of stuff. And so if like these rules are so strict that you can't use that, get credit for that, it's going to change what's doable. And the reason the tax credits are so important in that context is, if you're relying heavily on curtailed energy, it's not always available. And so the economics of the tax credit really make a big difference to encourage people to build systems that can soak that up. So it's stuff like that where it's just like, let's make sure we thought this all the way through, because that curtailed power, it's a good thing, right? Because we're overbuilding so that we can use it as much as possible. But it's not going down, it's going up.
Yeah, I think that's a really good and specific example. Thank you, Tyson. We have specific examples in the Pacific Northwest that are similar, a little bit less in connection with the solar duck curve and more in connection with the hydro resources that we have available and are sometimes curtailed. And so it's the same point. There's opportunity when you provide some flexibility to operators within a region to respond to resource conditions. You free up the opportunity to optimize across the system. So I think the regulations in their current form are too strict and are suboptimal and potentially creating some unintended consequences So stop
Thank
that.
you for that. I hadn't. I would have assumed that curtailed power is always fine to take. Like you don't want to waste the stuff. It's been so hard to provide to produce it in the first place. So, any last words, TJ? We know you have to go for another webinars, but any last words?
No plan survives contact with the enemy, and no tax incentive survives contact with reality when it tries to be implemented. So it's hard to get these things right. I think the robust comments speak to how much people care about this issue and how important it is that we get it as right as we can. There's just so many different use cases to consider. So yeah, even in this session, I've learned so much from both John and Tyson. So thank you all.
Really glad. So this is what we're here for, right? We're here to learn from others and also to put faces to the people, to the companies, that sometimes it's hard to find the right person. So thank you very much, John, Tyson, and TJ for being here with us. There is definitely going to be a session on 45 bits, so I'll have to talk to TJ and also to Tyson and John and see who they can recommend, because for us, really, the point is to bring this information to all of you. With good information, markets move faster. It's definitely a given. So this is part of our mission as well. So thank you very much, and see you in the next webinar, and hopefully also see you at the event when we do it later this year. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you very much, everyone in the audience. Bye.